I know this is going to sound pretty out there, but I need to tell you about something that happened recently. It's one of those stories you just have to hear to believe. I still think about it sometimes and shake my head in disbelief. So there I was, living my usual life in this quiet neighborhood. You know, the type where nothing much happens. Everyone kind of keeps to themselves. There's this one neighbor, Carol. She's been living across the street for years. She's been there for about 6 years. She's in her late 20s, but she's still got that youthful energy that makes you forget her age. I've always had this weird feeling when I've run into her. It wasn't anything obvious at first, just something that made me think twice about the way she looked at me. Sometimes it all started the day I went over there to borrow some sugar. You know how it goes. Run out of something, knock on the neighbor's door and see if they've got a spare. When I walked in that day, it wasn't just a quick, "Can I borrow a cup of sugar?" Something was off when I rang the doorbell. Carol answered a little slower than usual. Her hair was damp, like she'd just gotten out of the shower. I remember thinking, okay, she must have been busy or something, but it wasn't like her to answer the door in such a hurry. I could tell right away she wasn't expecting anyone, which was strange because she's usually the type to be welcoming. Normally she's welcoming no matter what. She invited me in, but there was this awkward tension in the air. It felt like we both knew something was about to happen, but we weren't saying it out loud. It might sound like something out of a movie, but it was real life. I could feel it in my bones. She asked me to sit down while she got the sugar. As she walked away to the kitchen, I noticed something: the door to her bathroom. The door to her bathroom was slightly ajar, just enough to see the faint steam rolling out. It was obvious she had just been in the shower, or maybe she was still in there. For a second, I felt like I should leave, but then Carol came back with the sugar and she seemed a little too eager to make conversation. "You know, you really should come over more often," she said with a smile. Her words were casual, but there was something behind them. She was definitely trying to keep me there. That's when I started feeling a bit awkward. I'd usually chat for a few minutes and then leave, but today it felt different. There was this strange energy between us, something unspoken. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "I don't usually get visitors when I'm fresh out of the shower, but you're different." The way she said it was almost like she was testing the waters. I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to say? I mean, there was nothing inappropriate about it, but there was something in the air that made it feel like something more was happening. Even though neither of us said it outright, I wasn't sure if it was just me reading too much into it. I had this gut feeling that Carol had something planned. It was like she was giving me an invitation, but not one that I could easily accept without thinking twice. Now, I'm not saying anything happened right then and there. I mean, that would be too easy. But I'll tell you what happened next. As I sat there sipping the cup of tea Carol offered me, which was way too hot for my taste, I couldn't stop thinking about the bathroom door. It was still cracked open just enough to remind me that she was freshly out of the shower. I had no idea what was going through her mind. We talked for a while and I remember she kept looking at me in a way that I couldn't quite place. She wasn't trying to hide it, she was looking straight at me. I was looking at her and wondering if maybe I'd misjudged the situation. Maybe Carol was more than just my neighbor. I wasn't sure. It wasn't until I stood up to leave that things got even more complicated. As I walked towards the door, she came up behind me and put her hand on my shoulder. It wasn't friendly. It was more like she was trying to keep me there. That's when I realized something was definitely happening, or at least about to happen. I know you're probably thinking, "Oh, come on, it's just a neighbor being friendly," but trust me, this was different, and I hadn't even scratched the surface of the situation yet. I won't lie, standing there by the door with Carol's hand on my shoulder was making me feel things I hadn't expected. I've never been the type to flirt or entertain anything that wasn't totally clear, but this moment it was different. It was like a line had been crossed that shouldn't have been. I took a step back, unsure of how to react. Carol, for some reason, didn't seem fazed at all. She just stood there, that same smile still plastered across her face, like she was waiting for me to say something. But I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing. Was she being playful, or was this something more serious? It wasn't the first time a neighbor had done something like this. It was nice for me, but there was something about this that felt different. She had this way of making everything seem so normal when it wasn't. It wasn't normal for her to be standing so close, her hand still on my shoulder, looking at me like she was waiting for me to make the next move. I could feel the heat in my cheeks, and I couldn't tell if it was because I was embarrassed or because I was honestly a little uncomfortable. As I stood there trying to figure out how to get out of this situation, Carol finally spoke. You don't have to go just yet, she said softly, her voice almost coaxing. I was just thinking maybe you'd like to hang out a bit, just us. It's been a while since we've had a proper chat. I felt my heart race a little. I don't know, I muttered, trying to backpedal, but she wasn't giving up that easily. Oh, come on, she insisted, taking a step closer. I promise. I wasn't sure if she was being sincere, but I couldn't ignore the way her eyes locked onto mine. It was almost like she was daring me to stay. The worst part was that I was tempted. I was honestly tempted to sit back down and just see where this went. But then, just as I was about to give in, I remembered something that stopped me dead in my tracks. My own personal boundary. I'd been taught to always keep my distance from situations like this. That seemed a bit strange, and this was definitely one of those situations. I wasn't about to walk into some kind of trap or let things get more complicated than they already were. I finally pulled away from her, muttering something about needing to get home. I've got to go, I said, fumbling with the door handle. My hand was shaking just a little. Thanks for the sugar, and with that I rushed out the door, feeling like my heart was pounding in my throat. The whole thing felt a bit strange, like I managed to get out of that situation without getting into trouble, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Carol wasn't done yet. I walked back to my place, my thoughts swirling. Was she just being friendly, or was there something else going on? I wasn't sure, but one thing was for sure. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. It's one thing to feel a little awkward after a moment like that, but it's something else entirely when the whole thing starts to. After that day, I kept running into Carol more and more. Every time there was this tension between us. It wasn't just small talk. Every conversation felt like it was about to get more serious. A few weeks later, I was walking to the store when I saw her on her porch. She waved, and I couldn't help but wave back, but then she did something strange. She motioned for me to come over. My heart was racing. I had no idea what to expect, but I didn't want to seem rude, so I walked over slowly. When I got closer, she didn't say anything right away. She just looked at me, her eyes scanning my face. It was like she was looking for some kind of reaction. Let me tell you, the way she was looking at me was enough to make anyone uncomfortable. It was like she was waiting for me to say something to take the next step, but I wasn't about to make the same mistake I made last time. I started to turn away, telling her I had to run some errands, but then she spoke again. Don't you want to know what I've been thinking about lately? Her voice was soft, but it had this strange, almost inviting tone to it that sent a chill down my spine. You know how sometimes people say things and you can just tell? I sensed that Carol wasn't being completely honest. It seemed like she was testing me to see how far I was willing to go. I couldn't take the silence anymore, so I stopped and looked her in the eyes. What do you mean? Her smile widened and she leaned in a little, lowering her voice. I've been thinking about what happened that day when you came over for the sugar. At this point, I knew exactly where this was going. I wasn't sure how to react. The tension between us had been building for weeks, and now it was reaching its peak. It felt like time was slowing down as I stood there trying to figure out what to say next. Carol's words hung in the air like a weight I couldn't shake off. She said, I've been thinking about what happened that day. Her voice was low and almost teasing, as if she were daring me to admit something I hadn't even thought about yet. I tried to keep my cool, but my mind was racing. I knew what she was implying, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to face it. I hadn't thought about what happened before, but standing here now, I was beginning to realize that Carol wasn't just the friendly neighbor. She was someone who was clearly interested in something more. So, what exactly are you thinking about? I asked, trying to play it off like I wasn't bothered. Given the situation, I decided to keep things casual. I didn't want to give her the wrong impression or let her think I was going to just go along with whatever she had in mind. Carol took a step closer, and for the first time, I realized just how close we were standing. There was something in the way she looked at me that made me feel both drawn to her and completely on edge. She said, I've been thinking that maybe we could get to know each other a little better. It was a simple request, but the meaning behind it was anything but innocent. I have to be honest, there was a part of me that was so tempted to take the bait. She was attractive and the attention felt flattering, but I wasn't that guy. I knew better than to let things spiral out of control. I needed to set some boundaries before things went too far. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Carol, I don't know what you're getting at, but I'm not. As soon as I said it, I could see her face change. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't pleased either. The smile that had seemed welcoming was gone, replaced by something more calculating. It was as if she was trying to figure out what was going on in my head. "You're different from the others," she said, her tone softer now. It was almost as if she was trying to get me to feel something. "You don't have to act like this is a big deal. It was just two people talking, nothing more." But I could tell it wasn't just a casual conversation. She was after more. And I knew if I stuck around, I'd be walking right into it. I didn't want to, though. I wasn't that guy. And I needed to remind myself of that. "I think it's best if I go now," I said firmly, turning to walk away. I could hear her calling after me, but I didn't turn back. It was tough to just walk away from a situation like that, but I knew I had to do it for both of us. I couldn't risk getting involved in something I wasn't prepared for, and I couldn't let things go too far, especially not with Carol. But here's where it gets crazy. As I walked back to my house that day, I thought everything was over. I thought I had escaped that awkward tension and put everything back to where it should be. But I couldn't have been more wrong. A few days later, I was sitting in my living room minding my own business when I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated before opening it. When I finally did, there stood Carol, looking more serious than I'd ever seen her. "I need to talk to you," she said without a smile. Her voice was cold and urgent. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I had no idea what this was about, but I knew I couldn't just turn away. She was away again. There was something in her eyes that told me this wasn't going to be the same casual chat we'd had before. I stepped aside, letting her in. As she crossed the threshold, I could tell something was different. The air felt charged. I was starting to realize that maybe I hadn't seen the full picture of what had been going on. I closed the door behind Carol. As soon as she stepped inside, I knew something had changed. There was a heaviness in the air. There was a sense of unease in the air, a feeling of urgency that I hadn't experienced before. It was clear that she wasn't there for a casual conversation. She had come for something more serious. She walked into my living room and sat down on the couch without saying much. She didn't even offer to make herself comfortable or wait for me to ask her to sit down. She just looked at me, her eyes piercing through me like she was searching for something. She asked, "Can we talk?" Her voice was low and steady. There was no sweetness in it this time, just a quiet intensity. I nodded, sitting down across from her, though my heart was racing. I had no idea where this was going, but I could tell it wasn't going to be good. "What's going on, Carol?" she asked, looking away for a moment and taking a deep breath before turning back to me. Something between us had changed. I froze, wondering if I'd missed something. Had she been feeling this way all along? I wanted to tell her that whatever this was, it had to stop, but I couldn't find the words. I didn't want to be rude or make things worse, but I needed to get my point across. "You can't ignore it, Carol," I finally said, my voice stronger than I'd expected. "We're talking about here, and it's not right. It's not just some casual flirtation. It's more complicated than that." She didn't seem fazed by my words. In fact, she seemed relieved that I'd said something. It was as if she'd been waiting for me to admit what we both already knew. Even if neither of us wanted to say it out loud. "You're right," she said softly, looking down at her hands. "I didn't want to admit it either, but it's true. I have to admit that there's something that's been drawing me towards you. I can't pretend it's not there anymore." There was a moment of silence, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. I didn't know what to say next. There was a part of me that wanted to understand and to know where her feelings were coming from. But there was another part of me that knew I had to draw a line and stop this from spiraling further. I think you need to take a step back, Carol," I said carefully, trying to make it clear but also keep the tone as gentle as possible. "This isn't something you can just ignore or push away. It's messy, and it's not something either of us should get involved in." Carol sat silently, staring at the floor for a long time. I could see the disappointment on her face, but there was something else too. Maybe even a sadness that she knew what I was saying was true. "I don't want to hear it, but I think deep down she already knew," she said. "I'll go," finally standing up. She reached the door and turned back to look at me one last time. "I just wanted to say thank you for being honest with me and for not pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't." Before I could respond, she stepped outside and left without another word. The days that followed felt strangely empty. I kept replaying the conversation over and over in my head. I was trying to figure out if I'd made the right decision. On the one hand, I knew I'd done what needed to be done, but on the other hand, there was this feeling that I'd let something important slip away. I didn't see Carol for a few weeks after that. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence, But then I started to wonder if she was avoiding me every time I walked past her house. Her lights were off, her front door was shut, and there were no friendly waves or casual hellos. I'd been wondering where she'd gone. Then one day I got a note in my mailbox. It wasn't anything official or serious, just a simple letter with a return address, just her handwriting. The letter was brief, but it made my stomach drop when I read it. I'm moving away. I just couldn't stay in the same place anymore. Maybe it's for the best. Thanks for everything. It was clear that she had made up her mind. I was relieved, but I still had this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Had I really been able to stop something before it got out of control? Or had I just pushed someone who needed help even further away? Just when I thought it was all over, something unexpected happened. A few weeks later, I got a message from Carol. It wasn't a phone call or anything. It was just a simple text message. It said, "I know you think this is all behind us, but you should know you were never the only." I read the text over and over, letting her words sink in. Who was she talking about? I never found out. Part of me was glad some mysteries are better left unsolved, but I'll tell you this. Carol's move and the events that led up to it left a mark on me. It was a reminder that sometimes things don't go as planned, and the most unexpected situations can turn into something far more complicated than we ever imagined. Music.